My name is Olivia, and at 28 years old, I never expected a single conversation to unravel everything I thought I knew about us. One evening, I was leaning against the kitchen counter, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, and he looked at me like he had rehearsed some devastating speech for weeks. "I have feelings for you," he said slowly, "just not romantic ones." The words landed in my chest like a hammer I hadn't seen coming, shattering the quiet rhythm of our apartment that had always felt like a sanctuary. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind spun, trying to grasp what he meant, trying to process that the person I had trusted with my heart, with my mornings and late night talks, didn't love me the way I loved him. He didn't flinch, didn't crumble, didn't beg me to reconsider. Instead, he looked calm, almost detached, like he had prepared himself for my inevitable breakdown. What I didn't know, what no one would guess from that calm exterior, was that he had the engagement ring hidden in his car. He had been planning a weekend by the beach where we had our first date, a proposal he had rehearsed in secret, imagining the look on my face, imagining the life we would start together. And yet here I was, hearing the truth that would change everything, before any promise of forever could be made real. I could feel the space between us grow wider with every second. I wanted to speak, to argue, to plead, but no words could capture the mix of disbelief, heartbreak, and stunned confusion that gripped me. His voice remained steady, explaining that he cared about me deeply, but not in the way that mattered most. I glanced at him, his hands resting on the edge of the counter, his eyes calm yet sharp, and realized that the foundation of our relationship had been rewritten in a single breath. The apartment that had felt like our world now seemed unfamiliar, charged with tension. He was still there, physically present, but emotionally he had already stepped back, and I, my heart, my plans, my imagined future, was left hanging in that quiet, suffocating space, waiting for something that would never come. In that moment, I understood that life could pivot in an instant, that the people you trust most could suddenly become strangers. And yet, even as the shock reverberated through me, a tiny ember of resolve sparked deep inside. I would survive this. Somehow, I would turn the heartbreak into clarity, even if it meant dismantling everything I thought I had. I remember the first time I saw him like it was yesterday. It was at a small coffee shop tucked between two high-rise buildings downtown, the kind of place where the smell of fresh pastries mingled with espresso and the chatter of strangers felt like background music to life. He was sitting alone, nose buried in a book, a subtle furrow in his brow as if he were untangling some complicated thought. I don't know what drew me to him. Maybe it was the quiet intensity of his focus, the way the light hit his hair just so, or the curve of his smile when he looked up briefly at the barista. Whatever it was, I couldn't look away. Our first conversation was clumsy but sincere. I spilled my coffee within the first 5 minutes, and he laughed, softly, without judgment, and offered me his napkin. From that moment, there was an unspoken understanding between us, a connection that felt both accidental and inevitable. We started meeting at that coffee shop more often, talking about everything and nothing, losing hours in the comfortable rhythm of each other's company. Within months, our lives intertwined in ways I didn't expect. I found myself remembering tiny details about him. The way he liked his oat milk latte with an extra shot and vanilla syrup, how he hummed when he was deep in thought, the faint scent of cedarwood cologne that lingered on his jacket. He noticed my quirks too, my habit of twirling my hair when nervous, my love for random poetry scribbled on napkins, the way I laughed at things I shouldn't. There was an ease between us, a sense that we could be exactly who we were and still be enough for each other. Living together came naturally, almost seamlessly. Our apartment downtown became a sanctuary filled with mismatched furniture, shared playlists, and the smell of home-cooked meals. We had routines that made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. Lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes and soft music, late-night walks through empty streets, quiet nights reading together on the couch. I loved the way he listened, truly listened, when I spoke about my work, my dreams, my fears. He made me feel seen in a world that often overlooked the small details. Our bond deepened as we celebrated milestones and weathered minor storms. There was comfort in knowing we had each other. In the subtle ways we supported one another, fixing each other's mistakes, celebrating achievements, sharing small victories. I believed in us with an unwavering certainty, in the kind of love that feels permanent because it grows from trust and intimacy, not just passion. And yet, even in those blissful early days, there were small cracks I didn't recognize at the time, moments when his gaze would linger elsewhere, fleeting expressions I dismissed as tiredness or stress. But I never questioned the foundation we had built because love, as I knew it, meant giving the benefit of the doubt. I had no idea that those tiny fissures would widen over time, becoming the fault lines that would shake everything I had held dear. By the time he had the engagement ring in his car, I thought I knew everything about him. I thought I understood our love, the rhythm of our life together, the unspoken promises we had made. But life, as it often does, had a way of unraveling certainty. The connection I thought was mutual, the future I had imagined so vividly, was built on an assumption that would soon be brutally corrected. It's strange how love can feel so absolute and yet so fragile at the same time. Looking back now, I see the beauty in our beginnings, the laughter, the intimacy, the warmth, but also the vulnerability that comes with giving your heart completely to someone. Every touch, every shared meal, every whispered secret had led me here, to a moment when my world would shift in ways I never saw coming. It started with little things, the kind of moments that make you question your own perception before you realize the truth. At first, it was subtle. He would leave the apartment earlier than usual, claiming extra work at the office. Or I would notice the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't mine, lingering on his jacket, a ghost that made my stomach twist with unease. I wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to imagination, but the tiny alarms in my chest refused to quiet down. Then came the text messages, the ones that flashed briefly on his phone screen before he'd snap it shut. Names I didn't recognize, smiley faces that didn't feel innocent. I told myself not to look, not to dig, not to allow suspicion to poison what I still wanted to be perfect. But there's a point where intuition becomes impossible to ignore. My heart began to tighten every time he walked into a room, every time he laughed a little too long at a message he claimed was from work. I remember one Thursday evening clearly. He had mentioned a book club meeting again, the same one that had cropped up every Thursday for months. I didn't question it at first. He'd always loved reading. But that night, I was waiting for him in the living room, pretending to be absorbed in a magazine while keeping an ear on the apartment door. When he returned, his shirt smelled of a floral scent I didn't recognize, and his eyes had that slight flicker of something guilty. Small, fleeting, but unmistakable. My heart pounded. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't confrontation I wanted yet. I needed proof. I started piecing together little inconsistencies, the hotel receipts that didn't make sense, the calendars he claimed were overbooked, and the way he typed quickly, defensively, whenever his phone lit up in my presence. The more I noticed, the more I felt the threads of our relationship fray under my fingers, and the more I realized that trust alone could no longer anchor me. I remember sitting on the couch one night, the apartment dark except for the glow of the city outside, my fingers trembling as I opened his laptop under the guise of helping with work. And there it was. Texts synced across devices, photos, reservations that weren't ours. Evidence that my intuition had been right all along. Every carefully constructed lie, every omitted detail, every time I had brushed off a gut feeling, it all came rushing back to me in a wave of betrayal and heartbreak so fierce it almost knocked me off the couch. I confronted him gently at first, voice shaking despite my attempt at calm. "Is there something you need to tell me?" I asked, trying to sound rational, trying to cling to the remnants of hope that this was a misunderstanding. He laughed, softly, condescendingly, like I was naive for thinking there could ever be a simple explanation. That laugh cut deeper than anything else, more than the evidence, more than the betrayal. The seed of conflict had been planted, but it didn't explode yet. It hovered, heavy and suffocating, infiltrating every corner of our shared space, altering every glance, every touch. I could no longer separate the person I loved from the person who had deceived me, and the tension became unbearable. I was trapped between my longing for what we had been and the reality of what he had become. By the time I realized that the book club was nothing but a cover for 3 years of infidelity, the seed had grown into a gnawing, persistent ache in my chest. Every memory of laughter, of shared secrets, of whispered promises was now tinged with a bitter awareness. And yet, even with the pain so raw, I knew I had to prepare for the confrontation that would inevitably come. The storm was approaching, and there was no hiding from it any longer. The day I finally confronted him, the apartment felt smaller, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what was about to happen. I had spent the morning gathering evidence, photos, receipts, synced messages, each piece a cruel confirmation of the life I thought we had shared. My hands shook as I laid everything out on the kitchen table, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind a storm of disbelief and rage. He came home like nothing was wrong, carrying his usual calm, a book under one arm, the faint scent of that other woman clinging to him like a shadow. He smiled at me, a smile that used to make my stomach flip, but now felt foreign, hollow, mocking. "Hey, how was your day?" he asked casually, as if the years we had spent building a life together were nothing more than background noise. I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The moment I said it, I could feel the shift in the air, a silent acknowledgement that nothing would ever be the same. At first, he tried to deflect, to laugh it off like I was overreacting, like this was some minor misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a few words. But I had anticipated that. I placed the messages, receipts, and photos in front of him, one by one, letting each item speak for itself. I watched the color drain from his face, the slight tremor in his hands that he tried so hard to mask. I had never felt power like this before, not the brute kind, but the quiet, undeniable control that comes from knowing the truth. "You've been seeing her for 3 years?" I asked, each word measured, deliberate, sharp as glass. His silence was a confession, louder than any words he could have said. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to find some excuse, some justification that might lessen the blow, but there was nothing. Not a single excuse could undo the betrayal, the lies, the stolen moments of my life. I remember the way my chest ached, not just from anger, but from the profound sorrow of realizing how completely I had misjudged him. The man I had trusted with my mornings, my nights, my dreams, had been living a double life, hiding his heart elsewhere while I had invested everything in us. Every detail of our life, the shared meals, the quiet laughter, the comforting routines, was now tainted, a cruel illusion I had mistaken for love. He finally spoke, his voice low, almost pleading. "I didn't want you to find out like this." But it sounded hollow, rehearsed, a weak attempt to control the narrative. I could barely listen. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I had spent months imagining how I would handle a heartbreak, rehearsing the perfect confrontation in my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for this cold, sharp reality. In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. The initial shock and anger coexisted with a fierce clarity. I realized that this confrontation wasn't just about rage, it was about reclaiming myself, about drawing a line I would never allow him to cross again. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't beg. I simply stood there, holding the evidence, my eyes locked on his, silently demanding acknowledgement, accountability, honesty. The engagement ring, the one he had bought weeks earlier and kept hidden in his car, became a symbol of everything that had been unbalanced in our relationship. I knew what it meant: plans, dreams, a future that had been carefully imagined by someone who wasn't fully committed. I didn't touch it yet, didn't demand explanations about his intentions with it. All I knew was that the life we had built was a lie, and I had to make space for truth. He tried to apologize, his words fumbling, clumsy, inadequate. I let him speak for a moment, then shook my head slowly. "I understand now," I said, my voice calm but steely. "But that doesn't change what's been done. I have to think about me, about what I deserve." He looked stunned, as if he hadn't anticipated that I could respond without crumpling into despair. That realization alone gave me a quiet, profound strength. That night, I didn't collapse. I didn't sob endlessly. I packed the few things that mattered most to me, the personal pieces of my life that he had no claim to, and I sat alone in the apartment, listening to the city hum outside the window. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own autonomy, the raw, unshakable understanding that I would survive this, that I could rebuild, and that I didn't need someone who treated my heart as an accessory to their convenience. After the confrontation, the apartment felt emptier than it ever had before, even with him still there. His presence, once comforting, now felt intrusive, like a ghost that refused to leave. I couldn't look at him without feeling the sting of betrayal, the weight of 3 years of lies pressing down on my chest. Every memory of shared laughter, every quiet moment we had cherished was now tinged with a bitter aftertaste. I spent hours pacing the living room, running my hands over surfaces that once held warmth. Our coffee mugs, the small stack of books he loved, the throw blanket we shared on lazy Sunday mornings. They all felt alien, reminders of a reality that never truly existed. My mind replayed the evidence over and over, each photo, each message, each subtle lie twisting into a fresh knot of pain. I couldn't escape it. Even the familiar hum of the city outside seemed to mock me, reminding me that life was continuing while mine had been fractured. I caught myself glancing at the engagement ring, still tucked away in his car, and a pang of sorrow struck me. The symbol of what I had believed would be our forever now represented the depth of deception I had been blind to. I thought about the plans he had made, the weekend he imagined proposing on the beach where we had our first date, and it hit me like a physical blow. That image of him, hopeful and confident, planning a future I would never share, twisted in my chest. Anger surged alongside grief. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake him until he understood the extent of the hurt he had caused. But I didn't. Instead, I channeled the anger inward, letting it sharpen my resolve. I realized then that crying or pleading wouldn't restore what was lost. The only thing I could do was reclaim control over my life, over my emotions, over my future. I called a close friend that evening, someone who had always been my anchor, and I let the tears flow freely into the phone, unguarded and raw. "I don't even know who he is anymore," I whispered, my voice trembling. My friend didn't try to offer platitudes or false comfort. She simply listened, letting me spill the tangled mess of sorrow and rage that had taken residence inside me. Her presence, even through a phone call, reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I could survive this, and that my worth wasn't tied to someone who had treated me as a convenience. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle shifts in my behavior. I stopped performing the little routines I had maintained for him, the gestures I once made automatically out of love. No more carefully brewed coffees in the morning, no more making pancakes just to see him smile, no more anticipating his every need. It wasn't spite, it was reclamation. I was defining boundaries, marking the difference between the woman I had been for him and the woman I needed to become for myself. When he spoke, I listened with a detached patience, carefully measuring my words, ensuring that nothing I said would give him an opening to manipulate or minimize the betrayal. I could see his confusion, the way he struggled to understand that I wasn't the same person who had once forgiven small lies and overlooked inconsistencies. That woman was gone. What remained was someone who had seen the truth, acknowledged the pain, and refused to let it dictate her life anymore. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, alone, I felt the weight of absence, of love mislaid, of trust broken. I traced the outlines of memories in my mind, letting each one pass through me, acknowledging the sorrow without allowing it to consume me. In that darkness, I discovered a strange clarity. My life was mine to live. My heart was mine to protect, and no amount of longing or regret could force someone else's love where it didn't belong. By the end of that week, I had begun to feel a subtle shift, a quiet, resilient strength that didn't rely on him or his acknowledgement. I was angry, yes, and heartbroken, yes, but I was also lucid, aware, and determined. Every choice I made, every boundary I set, every act of self-preservation was a step toward reclaiming the life I had invested in him, but now had to reclaim for myself. And through it all, I began to understand the core of my resilience. The truth, no matter how painful, had given me a rare gift, the chance to see him clearly, to see myself clearly, and to start the process of healing and redefining what love meant on my own terms. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched over an abyss I didn't even know existed. Living with him in the same apartment after knowing the truth was unbearable, yet I couldn't escape immediately. Every corner, every shared space reminded me of the intimacy that had once existed, our morning routines, our shared playlists, the subtle smell of his cologne that lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Even the apartment felt complicit in my torment, walls echoing with silent accusations I couldn't put into words. It wasn't just him I had to navigate. His family, once distant and polite, seemed to sense a subtle change in our dynamic and began inserting themselves in ways that made me feel cornered. His mother's calls became more frequent, her voice a mixture of concern and veiled judgment. "Are you sure you're handling things appropriately?" she asked one evening, the sweetness in her tone masking the weight of her disapproval. "It's just, we all want what's best for him, you know?" I felt my jaw tighten. I wanted to tell her that what was best for him was irrelevant. It was my life that had been fractured, my trust that had been shattered. But I smiled calmly and said, "I'm managing, thank you." At the same time, he tried to reclaim some semblance of control. He began speaking in a measured, almost rehearsed way, as if by carefully choosing words he could erase the past. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, his eyes attempting a warmth I no longer recognized. "You know I care." I watched him closely, observing the twitch in his jaw, the hesitation in his hands. It wasn't sincerity, I could see through it now, but I remained silent, letting the weight of the evidence I had collected speak for itself. The tension escalated during mundane moments. Cooking in the kitchen became a minefield. I stopped preparing meals for us, insisting that he take responsibility for his own food. The look on his face the first time I said, "You're on your own for dinner tonight," was priceless, a mix of disbelief, frustration, and irritation. But I didn't relent. Every action was deliberate, a quiet assertion of the boundary that had been violated too many times. Even small household responsibilities became charged with emotion. When he left the apartment messy, I no longer cleaned up automatically. When bills needed attention, I insisted on equal participation, reminding him that the lifestyle we shared was no longer one-sided. His previous ease, the effortless charm that had masked so many lies, faltered under the weight of accountability. And when I refused to fix his devices for him, like I had done countless times before, I saw the subtle panic in his eyes. "I'm used to you handling everything," he admitted one evening, voice tight. I don't know how to manage on my own." I smiled, not unkindly, but firmly. "Now you will. That's part of being responsible for your own choices." His friends and colleagues, unaware of the intricacies of our relationship, began noticing the shift. Casual conversations that once flowed naturally became clipped, tense. Invitations I would have once joined him on were politely declined. I was no longer participating in the performative normalcy he relied on to mask his duplicity. Every social interaction became a subtle battlefield, my silence more potent than words. One evening, his mother came over unexpectedly. I had prepared a small dinner for myself, something simple and comforting, a roast chicken, roasted vegetables, and a quiet glass of wine. She arrived, smiling, her eyes scanning the apartment, and immediately launched into conversation about family gatherings, subtle jabs at my independence, and veiled remarks about my perceived temperament. I listened carefully, my back straight, my hands resting on the table as I answered politely but firmly. I could feel the simmering heat of defiance rising in me. I would not allow her, or anyone else, to manipulate my emotions or force me to forgive what I had not yet healed from. At the same time, his attempts to manipulate me personally escalated. He would try to evoke nostalgia, recounting memories of shared vacations, lazy Sunday mornings, or quiet nights reading together. He would smile, reaching for the familiarity that had once bound us together. I felt the familiar tug, the echo of affection that had been genuine at the time, but I could see the danger in it now. Every memory he invoked was a tool, a test to see if I could be swayed into ignoring the betrayal. I resisted. I reminded myself that the past, though beautiful, could not justify a present built on lies. The climax of this tension came one rainy evening when we found ourselves forced into a long, silent drive. The streets glistened with reflections of city lights on wet asphalt, the world outside blurred by the relentless downpour. He reached for my hand briefly, as he had done countless times before, and I pulled away, feeling the sharp sting of everything we had lost. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, frustration and confusion mingling in his voice. "We've had so many good years together. Why throw it all away?" I turned to him, my eyes steady, my voice calm but unwavering. Because what we had was built on illusions. 3 years of betrayal can't be erased by nostalgia or charm. I loved who I thought you were, but I can't love the person you've proven yourself to be, and I won't continue living a lie just because it's comfortable. The silence that followed was almost deafening, punctuated only by the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers. By the time we returned to the apartment, I felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on me. The escalation was complete. Every family intervention, every subtle manipulation, every attempt to regain control had failed. I had established my boundaries, my autonomy, and the stark reality was undeniable. Nothing would be the same again. Our shared world had shifted, irreversibly, and I had no choice but to confront the consequences head on. Even in the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. The tension, the escalating confrontations, and the intrusion of family pressure had sharpened my understanding of myself. I could see the difference between genuine love and convenience, between respect and entitlement. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the only path forward was one guided by truth, integrity, and the fierce determination to reclaim the life that had been hijacked by lies. The dark moment arrived not with a dramatic confrontation or a shouting match, but quietly, insidiously, in the middle of an ordinary evening. I was alone in the apartment, the city lights outside casting a pale glow on the walls, and for the first time, the weight of betrayal fully descended upon me. It wasn't just the fact that he had been unfaithful. It was the realization of how thoroughly I had invested myself in someone who never truly loved me the way I had loved him. I sat on the couch, my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the empty space beside me where he had once sat, where he had whispered promises I now knew were hollow. The silence was deafening. Every shared memory, the weekend trips, the late-night conversations, the small gestures of love I had treasured, played like a cruel slideshow in my mind. I could almost hear the echo of his laughter in the empty room, a sound that had once been comforting and now felt like mockery. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, instinctively wanting to call someone, anyone, to anchor me in reality. But no words could bridge the chasm I felt inside. Even friends and family couldn't fully understand the depth of what had been taken from me, the intimacy, the trust, the years of emotional investment that had been treated like an accessory rather than something sacred. I realized then that the hurt was not just anger, it was grief, raw and unrelenting, mourning the loss of a love that had never truly been mine to begin with. I thought about the engagement ring he had planned to give me, the one now sitting uselessly in his car. My chest ached with the irony. A symbol of commitment, of shared dreams, had been reduced to a reminder of deception. The future I had imagined, the milestones I had anticipated with excitement and certainty, evaporated like mist, leaving nothing but the cold truth. Sleep offered no refuge. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a physical force. Every nerve felt raw, every breath heavy. I couldn't stop imagining the other woman, wondering what she represented to him that I hadn't. Anger bubbled up and mixed with shame, a toxic cocktail that made my chest tighten and my stomach churn. I felt exposed, humiliated, as if my heart had been displayed for the world to see and dismissed as worthless. Even daily routines became unbearable. Making coffee, a simple act that had once brought joy and comfort, felt mechanical and hollow. Passing by his side of the closet, smelling his lingering cologne, my body tensed involuntarily. Every shared space in the apartment became a reminder of trust violated, a shrine to the illusion I had been living under. I wanted to leave, to run away, but the logistics, the familiarity, the emotional entanglement made escape feel impossible. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt. It was the subtle realization of how long it had been happening, the extent to which I had been blind, and the countless ways I had unknowingly enabled him. Memories of fixing his computer, setting up his devices, anticipating his needs, preparing his favorite meals, they all flashed through my mind. I had poured myself into a relationship built on deception, and now the cost of that investment was a loneliness so profound it threatened to consume me. Tears flowed freely that night, unrestrained, as I allowed myself to feel the full depth of despair. I thought about all the plans that would never come true: beach trips where he would have proposed, quiet Sunday mornings, future holidays, potential family moments I had imagined with hope. The grief was suffocating, yet strangely necessary, a cleansing of the illusions I had clung to for too long. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, drained to the bone, but a small ember of resolve lingered. The darkness had been absolute, a place where pain and sorrow intertwined into a near paralyzing force. Yet in that darkness, I understood something crucial. Surviving this moment meant accepting the reality of betrayal, acknowledging the pain without allowing it to define me, and beginning the slow, deliberate process of reclaiming my life. The dark moment was the pivot, the emotional abyss where everything I had known and trusted had collapsed, leaving me raw and exposed. But it was also the threshold. I realized that from this place of utter vulnerability, I could begin to rise, rebuild, and redefine my worth. The abyss had shown me the cost of loving someone who didn't love fully in return, and in that stark clarity, I found the first whispers of strength. The turning point came quietly, almost unassumingly, yet it hit me with the force of a storm. I realized that I didn't need his acknowledgement, his apologies, or his confessions to reclaim my life. The power had always been mine. I had only allowed him to hold it by staying blind to the truth. Now, seeing everything laid bare, I understood that my response, my choices, and my actions would define the outcome. It started with small, deliberate steps. I returned the apartment to myself, not out of spite, but to mark a boundary. I rearranged my side of the bedroom, cleared out spaces he had monopolized, and organized my belongings in a way that reflected independence, strength, and clarity. Every action was a statement. I was no longer complicit in a relationship that had cost me years of emotional labor without reciprocity. When I confronted him with the knowledge that I had seen all of his hidden messages, receipts, and evidence of infidelity, I did it with calm, deliberate honesty. There was no hysteria, no pleading. I looked him in the eyes and said, "I know everything. I've known for a long time, and I've chosen to confront it on my terms." His expression faltered, shock and panic mingling in equal measure. I could see the calculations in his eyes, the realization that he had underestimated my resolve. He tried the old tactics, pleading, excuses, manipulations, but I remained unwavering. I understood fully now that his attempts to regain control were simply proof of his fear of losing the comfortable arrangements he had maintained while deceiving me. I didn't engage in arguments or recriminations. Instead, I used silence, clarity, and the weight of truth as my allies. Each time he faltered, I felt a quiet, powerful satisfaction, not born of cruelty, but of self-assertion. The most revealing moment came when he tried to appeal to nostalgia, recounting the years we had shared, the laughter, the routines, the intimacy. But this time, I refused to be swayed. I let the memories exist without granting them power over me. I said softly, "Yes, we had moments that were real, but those moments don't excuse the years of lies. I loved you fully, but you never loved me in the same way." He recoiled slightly, as if the weight of my words physically struck him. I realized then that I had finally leveled the playing field. I also began reclaiming practical control. I changed passwords to accounts I had previously shared, organized my finances independently, and removed him from digital platforms we had used jointly. It wasn't vengeance, it was necessity. I was disentangling myself from a life that had been entwined with deceit, reclaiming autonomy over my space, my money, and my choices. Every small act was a piece of armor, a shield against any lingering manipulation or emotional coercion. In the midst of this, I made one decisive, symbolic move. I returned the engagement ring, the physical representation of his plan and my misplaced trust, to the jewelry store. I didn't dwell on it. I didn't dramatize it. I placed it down and walked away, feeling a sense of liberation that was almost palpable. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of pretense pressing down on me. Family involvement reached a peak when his sister pulled me aside, confessing what I had suspected but now confirmed. She revealed that he had known about my unwavering love and the proposal, yet chose to manipulate the situation to maintain access to a comfortable lifestyle while keeping me emotionally tethered. The revelation crystallized everything. He hadn't simply been unfaithful, he had planned a deception so calculated that it relied on my trust and devotion to function. It was in that moment, absorbing the truth, that I felt a surge of clarity and resolve. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was leading my own narrative. The betrayal had been exposed, the illusions shattered, and the boundaries were firmly in place. I felt a quiet, almost electric sense of power. My life, my heart, and my choices belonged to me alone. For the first time, I could envision a future untouched by his duplicity. I could imagine mornings where I woke up without fear, without calculation, without questioning the authenticity of someone's affection. I could see myself thriving in a space where love was mutual, respect was given freely, and trust was never taken for granted. The turning point wasn't dramatic or cinematic in the conventional sense. It was quiet, internal, and irrevocable. It was the moment when I recognized that the cost of betrayal did not have to be my continued suffering, that I had the power to reclaim everything he had tried to manipulate. I realized that this confrontation, this act of reclaiming control, wasn't just about him, it was about me, my dignity, and the life I was determined to build on my own terms. The fallout came like a tide, relentless and unyielding, washing over him while I remained firmly grounded on the shore of my newfound clarity. In the weeks following the turning point, the subtle tension in the apartment transformed into a stark reality. He was no longer in control, and every attempt to assert authority was met with quiet, unwavering resistance. It began with his daily routines, tasks he had relied on me to perform effortlessly, the coffee brewed just the way he liked, the meals prepared without asking. His devices fixed at a moment's notice were now squarely his responsibility. I had reclaimed my energy and space, and he had no choice but to adapt. I watched as frustration crept into his movements, a slow, simmering anger that he could no longer mask with charm or rehearsed apologies. The very comfort he had taken for granted, the effortless life I had sustained for him, was gone. The social consequences followed. Friends and colleagues began noticing the shift in our dynamic. Invitations I had once eagerly joined him on were now declined or attended separately. Conversations that had once flowed freely now carried a tension that made them stilted. It became evident that the facade he had relied on to maintain appearances was cracking. People could sense the change, even if they didn't know the full story. I could see it in their glances, the subtle pauses before responses, the way they navigated our presence. Family pressure intensified briefly, but I remained unyielding. His mother, who had once gently pried and questioned my every action, now met calm firmness where she expected uncertainty or concession. "I understand your concerns," I told her one evening, "but I am capable of managing my life and setting my own boundaries." Her expression, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant respect, mirrored the way the world seemed to recalibrate around me. No longer would I be judged for asserting myself. He would bear the social consequences of the choices he had made. Financial independence became another battlefield. I systematically disentangled our shared accounts, asserting ownership over my own money and demanding fairness in any shared expenses. He floundered initially, struggling to adjust to the reality that he could no longer rely on my emotional labor to subsidize his lifestyle. The ease with which he had once lived, the privileges he had assumed were permanent, began slipping away. I observed him carefully, noting every subtle shift in demeanor: hesitation, frustration, embarrassment. Each misstep, each moment of vulnerability, was a testament to the imbalance of the past being corrected. His attempts to manipulate, to evoke nostalgia or guilt, grew increasingly transparent. He tried to remind me of moments when we had been happy, when our life together had seemed effortless. But I met these attempts with calm, deliberate clarity. I reminded him that history, while real, could not excuse betrayal or entitlement. I had loved him with my whole heart, and I had been met with deception. The consequences of that deception were unfolding now in the quiet yet undeniable shifts of power and autonomy. The engagement ring, now returned, had become a symbol in more than one sense. Its absence marked the boundary he could no longer cross, a physical manifestation of the life he had forfeited. The return of the ring was a small act, yet its impact reverberated through the final months of our cohabitation. Every interaction reminded him that he had miscalculated, that I was not a passive participant to be maneuvered at his convenience. The ultimate manifestation of fallout came in the form of social and financial collapse on his side. Freed from the obligations of deceit and manipulation, I watched as he struggled to maintain the lifestyle he had once effortlessly sustained, while I had quietly managed the details. Expensive meals, subscriptions, and conveniences he had assumed as right were now his responsibility alone. He could no longer rely on me to provide the ease he had once taken for granted. The dissonance between his self-perception and reality became painfully clear. Meanwhile, my own life began to stabilize and flourish. I made small, yet deliberate changes, organizing my apartment, taking control of my finances, reconnecting with friends without the shadow of manipulation. Every step reinforced the lesson. Freedom and self-respect were more valuable than any illusion of romance built on deception. I began to envision a future unshackled by his choices, a life where trust was earned, not assumed, and where love would be mutual and genuine. Even he had to acknowledge silently that the power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. The carefully constructed narratives, the rehearsed charm, and the appeals to nostalgia could no longer hold sway. The consequences of his choices were manifest: isolation, discomfort, and a stark confrontation with the reality he had ignored for too long. Whereas I had reclaimed autonomy, clarity, and direction, he faced the repercussions of deceit, manipulation, and the profound cost of underestimating someone who had once loved him wholly. The fallout, though painful to witness in its intensity, carried a quiet satisfaction. I had not sought revenge. I had sought equilibrium, a restoration of boundaries and truth. The natural consequences of his actions, emotional exposure, social recalibration, and financial responsibility, served as a mirror of his own misjudgment. And in this mirror, I saw the stark difference between my life, carefully reclaimed and empowered, and his, shaken by the very deception he had relied upon. The ending wasn't dramatic, and there were no grand declarations or cinematic reconciliations. It was quiet, steady, and real. After the months of upheaval, confrontation, and fallout, I finally felt the weight lift from my chest. I could breathe deeply again, my heart unclenched, my mind clear. The apartment, once filled with echoes of betrayal, now reflected a life reclaimed, a sanctuary where I was in control, where trust and respect were earned, not assumed. I took time to reflect on everything I had endured: the heartbreak, the deception, the subtle manipulations. They had left scars, yes, but they had also illuminated a truth I hadn't fully grasped before. My worth was never dependent on someone else's love, approval, or acknowledgement. I realized that being in a relationship built on convenience and lies was far more damaging than facing solitude and clarity. The dark moments, the escalating tension, the fallout, they were not just tests of endurance, but lessons in self-respect and resilience. In the quiet mornings that followed, I allowed myself to feel gratitude, not for what I had lost, but for what I had gained: autonomy, clarity, and the courage to set boundaries that protected my heart. I began to envision the kind of love I deserved, one that would be reciprocal, honest, and nurturing. The illusion of romance I had once clung to had been stripped away, and in its place was a clearer, deeper understanding of love's true form. I also understood this power of emotional honesty, both given and received. His attempt to manipulate my feelings, to maintain access to the benefits of our relationship without genuine commitment, had failed because I honored my truth. I learned that friendship and love are not interchangeable, and that setting boundaries, even when painful, preserves dignity. Ultimately, the lesson was profound yet simple: love yourself fiercely, and do not settle for anything less than the respect and reciprocity you deserve. Healing is not about revenge. It is about reclaiming your life, your boundaries, and your vision for the future. The universe, in its quiet, mysterious way, often protects us from the mistakes we cannot yet see. As I closed the door on that chapter, I felt a calm certainty. I would carry the memories, the lessons, and even the scars with me, but they would no longer define my path. Instead, they would guide me, reminding me to honor myself, trust my instincts, and embrace a life where love is mutual, honest, and unwavering. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely, not out of relief alone, but out of recognition that I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever imagined.